In late June 1967, 75-year-old Louisa Dunne, a widowed grandmother, was found brutally raped and murdered in her own home in Bristol, England. Her killing shocked the community and baffled police. Despite an extensive investigation at the time, the case went cold and remained unsolved for nearly 58 years. But in 2025, in a dramatic breakthrough, detectives finally identified and arrested a suspect, a 92-year-old man, bringing resolution to what is thought to be the oldest cold case ever solved in the United Kingdom. This documentary retraces the full story of Louisa Dunne's murder, the decades-long hunt for the killer, and the modern forensic advances that ultimately delivered justice. Louisa Dunne was a twice-widowed pensioner who lived alone in Bristol. Louisa Jane Dunne was born in 1892 and lived through 2 world wars. By the 1960s, she was a familiar figure in the eastern neighbourhood of Bristol. Neighbours remember her as a friendly, independent woman, a mother of 2 daughters, a grandmother, and a twice-widowed widow who often sat on her doorstep watching the world go by. In her youth, Louisa had been active in the community. She married Edwin Teddy Parker, a local city councillor and trade unionist, and was once poised to become the mayoress of Bristol before Teddy's untimely death in 1945. Years later, she remarried to John Dunn in 1952, only to lose him as well in 1961. By 1967, 75-year-old Louisa lived a quiet life on her pension, surrounded by her books and memories of her late husbands. Though age and tragedy had made her somewhat reclusive, she remained a well-known and well-liked presence on Britannia Road, a cautious elderly lady who was security conscious, rarely opening her windows or doors to strangers. No one could imagine that this gentle grandmother would soon be a victim of a horrific crime. The last week of June 1967 seemed ordinary in Easton, until neighbours noticed something amiss at 58 Britannia Road. On the morning of 28th of June 1967, Louisa was not seen on her front step as usual. Even more alarming, one of her usually shut windows was found open, a sign that immediately raised concern, since Louisa was known to keep her home tightly secured. A concerned neighbour peered through the gap in the curtains only to make a ghastly discovery: Louisa's body lying on the floor of her living room. Police were summoned to the scene at once. Inside the modest terrace house, investigators found evidence of a brutal attack. Louisa had been strangled and asphyxiated, and signs of sexual violence were evident. It was later reported that the attacker also robbed her, stealing some of Louisa's belongings, driving the assault. Neighbours recalled hearing a single terrifying, frightened scream in the night, but then silence. Sometime between June 26 and June 28, an unknown intruder had entered the elderly woman's home and committed an unimaginably violent crime. The date and location, a summer night in the heart of her community, would be forever etched into local memory as the end of Louisa Dunne's long life. Detectives from the Bristol Constabulary launched an enormous investigation in the wake of Louisa's murder. The crime scene yielded 2 crucial pieces of forensic evidence: a partial palm print on the upstairs window and the perpetrator's biological traces on Louisa's clothing. However, in the 1960s, DNA profiling was unheard of. Investigators had to rely on traditional methods. They meticulously canvassed the neighbourhood and far beyond. Over 8,000 house-to-house inquiries were conducted, and some 1,300 witness statements were collected. Remarkably, police undertook a massive fingerprint and palm print dragnet. More than 19,000 men and boys in Bristol, and even across the UK and abroad, were asked to provide prints in hopes of matching the palm print left by the killer. Investigators also collaborated with specialists from New Scotland Yard to assist with the fingerprint operation. Despite these Herculean efforts, no match or prime suspects were found. The case grew frustrating. The palm print didn't correspond to any of the records, and other leads were scarce. Louisa's family and the community were left fearful and on edge, knowing a violent killer remained at large. As months turned into years with no arrest, the trail went cold. By the end of the 1960s, the murder of Louisa Dunne had become a cold case. Its thick case files, fingerprints and exhibits carefully boxed up and stored, waiting for a breakthrough that wouldn't come for decades. For decades, Louisa Dunne's case lingered in limbo. As the late 1960s and 1970s passed, the unsolved murder haunted the Bristol community, especially Louisa's surviving family. Her daughter and grandchildren had to carry on without answers, the stigma of the violent crime casting a long shadow. "I accepted that some murders just never get solved," admitted Mary Dainton, Louisa's granddaughter, who was 21 when her grandmother was killed. Indeed, as years turned into decades, it seemed the killer had literally gotten away with murder. The case was periodically reviewed by the police, but without new evidence or technology, no progress could be made. Still, crucial pieces of evidence, like Louisa's clothing, including the blue skirt she was wearing on the night of the attack, were preserved in storage, carefully labelled and sealed. These items sat in 20 boxes of case files and exhibits and gathered dust in the archives. Meanwhile, unknown to the investigators at the time, the man responsible for the crime was living his life. In fact, not long after the murder, the perpetrator left Bristol, moving first out of the region, possibly spending time in London, and eventually settling in Ipswich in eastern England. Decades passed. Astonishingly, during the years, the same man would commit other crimes. In 1977, 2 elderly women in Ipswich were raped in their homes under eerily similar circumstances, being a nighttime home break-in. The assailant in those cases, who at the time was unidentified, left fingerprints that led Suffolk police to conduct their own mass fingerprinting operation. In December 1977, a set of prints taken from a 34-year-old man named Ryland Headley matched the crime scene, and he was arrested for the Ipswich attacks. Headley was convicted in 1978 of those 2 rapes of women aged 79 and 84 and initially received a life sentence. But shockingly, an appeals court later reduced his sentence, and he only served about 7 years in prison for those crimes. By 1980, he was free, and his connection to the 1967 Bristol murder remained unknown to authorities. No one in Bristol suspected that the man who raped and killed Louisa Dunne had already been caught and released for other offences in another part of the country. The cold case files of Louisa's murder remained untouched by this development, as the technology and the evidence needed to link Headley to the 1967 crime simply did not exist yet. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Louisa's family continued to remember her and wonder who her killer was. Her granddaughter, Mary, later confessed that over time, the family just gave up hope of the killer ever being found, and had to live with the emptiness and sadness left by the unsolved crime. Little did they know that evidence saved by the foresight of the 1960s investigators would one day yield answers. It was only in the 21st century, with the advent of the DNA profiling and dedicated cold case units, that Louisa's case would finally move towards resolution. By the 21st century, forensic science had advanced far beyond what 1960s detectives could have imagined. In 2023, a dedicated major crime review team in the Avon and Somerset Police decided to re-examine the Louisa Dunne case in detail. Investigators pored over the old evidence boxes, searching for anything that might be retested using modern technology. One item immediately stood out: Louisa's blue wool skirt, the garment she had been wearing at the time of the attack. Decades earlier, the skirt had yielded no actionable clues beyond the fact that the attacker's bodily fluids were present. But now, forensic scientists hoped it could finally give up a secret. In May 2024, the skirt and other preserved samples, including hair strands, were sent to the specialized laboratory for DNA testing. At first, even advanced screening found nothing obvious. The biological evidence was degraded by age, but forensic expert Andrew Parry employed a new technique, carefully isolating male cells from the fabric where Louisa's assailant had left traces. By cutting 2 small sections of the skirt's fabric and analysing the fibres at the microscopic level, Parry and his team managed to extract a DNA profile from semen embedded in the cloth. It was an extraordinary moment. After 57 years, Louisa's clothing finally revealed a genetic fingerprint of her killer. A full DNA profile had been obtained. When the DNA match came through, Avon and Somerset Police moved swiftly. On the 19th of November 2024, officers knocked on the door of a modest home in Ipswich, Suffolk, the residence of a 92-year-old Ryland Headley. Headley, a frail, elderly man and a great-grandfather by this time, could never have expected to see the police on his doorstep for a crime nearly 58 years old. But the evidence against him was now compelling. In a carefully coordinated operation, Headley was arrested on suspicion of Louisa Dunne's murder and rape. Body cam footage from the arrest, later released to the public, shows officers gently escorting a white-haired, bewildered man into custody. The long dormant case has finally produced a suspect, one who had been hiding in plain sight since the 1960s. The arrest sent shockwaves through law enforcement and gave hope to Louisa's family. Mary Dainton recalls being stunned to receive the phone call after so many years. Police had actually found someone. "I never believed they'd be able to trace him," she said, describing her astonishment at the news. Headley was promptly charged and in early 2025 was brought before the courts. Because of his age and ongoing pandemic-era practices, his initial court appearances were conducted via video link from custody. This case was then scheduled for a full trial in Bristol Crown Court in June 2025. The trial of a 92-year-old for a 58-year-old crime was unprecedented. Headley, despite the DNA evidence, pleaded not guilty to both murder and the rape charges. Thus, prosecutors had to present the case as in trying a recent crime, with the challenge that nearly all the original witnesses were no longer alive. In fact, all but one of the people who gave statements in 1967 had since died. To reconstruct what happened, the prosecution relied on archival materials and creative legal allowances. Investigators had preserved the original witness statements from 1967, and these were read aloud in court as hearsay evidence. The jury heard chilling accounts recorded by neighbours long deceased, such as descriptions of a muffled scream heard on the night of the murder. One surviving witness, the doctor who had pronounced Louisa dead back in 1967, testified in person nearly 6 decades after doing his duty at the scene. Additionally, recordings or transcripts from Headley's 1970 rape cases were presented to establish a pattern. The voices of his 2 elderly victims from 1977, who by 2025 were also deceased, were brought into the courtroom through their prior testimony. This harrowing evidence gave the jurors a sense of the predator Headley had been in his mid-30s. It was as if the echoes of the past were finally catching up on him. After a 2-week trial, on the 30th of June 2025, the jury delivered its verdict. Ryland Headley was found guilty of the murder and rape of Louisa Dunne, almost 58 years to the day after the crime. At Bristol Crown Court, Justice Derek Sweeting pronounced sentence on the 1st of July 2025. Given the brutality of the crime and the devastating impact on the victim's family across generations, the judge had no reservations. He sentenced Headley to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. At Headley's advanced age, this was effectively a whole life sentence, as the judge bluntly told him, "You will never be released and you will die in prison." Headley, the court noted, showed no remorse or emotion as the verdict and sentence were read. Thus concluded the trial of one of the oldest defendants ever to face a murder charge in Britain. Headley is believed to be the oldest person in UK history to be convicted of a murder, and the case itself is thought to be the longest-running cold case ever solved in modern English policing. With Ryland Headley convicted, the Louisa Dunne murder case was officially closed, a remarkable 58 years after the crime. Outside the court, Louisa's family expressed a mixed relief of bittersweet sorrow. Her granddaughter, Mary, now an older woman herself, voiced gratitude that justice had finally been achieved, though so many who loved Louisa, including Louisa's own daughters, did not live to see this day. Mary Dainton noted that the crime had a far-reaching effect on the family and that her mother, Louisa's daughter, never recovered from it. Nevertheless, the successful resolution brought a measure of closure, and after the verdict, the family released a statement thanking the police for their unwavering efforts and affirming that Louisa will never be forgotten. Headley's conviction also resonates in the wider community and among law enforcement. Investigators hailed the outcome as proof that no case is ever truly unsolvable with time. Detective Inspector Dave Merchant, who led the review, praised the diligent work of both the original 1960s investigators and the modern forensic team. He emphasized that in 1967, detectives' painstaking collection of evidence, from preserving the skirt to recording thousands of fingerprints, laid the groundwork for the eventual breakthrough. The Avon and Somerset Police, along with the UK National Crime Agency, have since begun examining other unsolved cases from past decades to see if advanced DNA techniques could bring similar results. In light of Headley's history, Suffolk Police also opened inquiries into whether he may be connected to any other crimes in the regions where he lived. A 92-year-old man turning out to be a serial predator raised unsettling questions, but also hope that other cold cases might yet be solved. In the end, the story of Louisa Dunne stands as a testament to perseverance and the march of science. Nearly 6 decades late, a killer was unmasked and held accountable. Louisa's life, cruelly taken in 1967, has been honoured with the truth. Her case, once a dusty file in an evidence room, became a beacon for cold case investigations, proving that time need not erase the possibility of justice. As the final chapter closes, viewers are left with a somber but hopeful message: justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied.